When I was a kid, I used to watch a TV show called Cybernet. Basically, it was a show about game reviews and giving tips to the viewer. That show was the very first time I watched something related to gaming, and it helped me to find many games. I remember watching in awe the review of the upcoming Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. It was insane how real Snake looked and how drastic the game improved. I remember watching the reviews about Escape, Spyro, flying simulators like Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, Tomb Raider 4 and 5. But the thing that I remember the most is that thanks to the show, I discovered real-time strategy games like Warcraft 3, Age of Mythology, and Age of Empires. I remember the first time that I ever played Age of Empires 2. It was crazy how could you create life from nothing, and you had to be quick and witty in order to not get conquered. One of my favorite factions to use was the Chinese, solely based on how cool I thought it was a particular unit, the Chu Kon Nu. They use a devastating weapon called like that, Chu Kon Nu, that shoots 3 arrows in succession. I remember creating tons of them and just going wild, making a barrage of arrows towards any unit that came across me. But why does this matter? Well, because in today's video, we will explore a little bit of the history of the crossbow. We will also explore what is a remake, and we are going to use all of those elements to delve into Resident Evil 4 Remake and to answer the question, why the bolt thrower is important. Welcome everybody, my name is Mats, and this is the Mats Throw. Before continuing, I want to give a spoiler alert. I will spoil the recently released Resident Evil 4 Remake. None of the spoilers are going to be super in-depth, but there are going to be enough spoilers so many surprises will be ruined for you. Also, I'm going to be talking about Resident Evil and Crisis Core Reunion. So, this is the opportunity to leave and not get spoiled. On June 2022, there was an unexpected announcement. Resident Evil 4 was gonna get a remake. People were happy with it, but also they were scared. After the not that good remake of Resident Evil 3 and the 4th game being in a huge pedestal, many felt that it was an unnecessary remake. Moreover, because the original one is perfectly playable. As Doom, you can pretty much play Resident Evil 4 in almost any console. Resident Evil 4 Remake was released on March 24th, 2023 with an extremely good reception from both the critics and the players. Less than 2 weeks after the launch, the game sold 4 million units, becoming the fastest Resident Evil game up to date. The game has many changes. Ashley has personality and depth. Luis has been reworked and they retconned him to fit him better into the story. Most of the enemies actually speak Spanish, and they use proper words and plural. And Leon is faster, sassier, hotter, and deadlier. One of the least interesting changes that they did, and the topic of today's video, the addition of the bolt thrower. You can buy it from chapter 3 and on, and it's the perfect weapon that you can use to silently kill enemies, save ammo, or use it to throw mines. Now, this weapon has huge drawbacks, but we're going to talk about that later. Right now, I wanna know why they decided to add this new weapon and why, in my opinion, this weapon is important for the lore of the remake. But in order to do that, we need to clear some concepts before. What is a crossbow? In essence, it is a bow that is mounted in an elongated frame with a mechanism that holds a bowstring, and once the trigger mechanism is used, the string is released. In other words, you pull the trigger, an arrow will fly. Any bolt or arrow, I just read that you can use both of them, it really doesn't matter for this essay. Any bolt that it is in there will travel around 300 feet per second or 91 meters. As you may expect, this weapon was invented in China. The earliest iterations that were discovered were before the 6th century BC, and there's historical evidence that they were already present during the Warring States period in the 4th period BC. If you're curious about the Warring States, basically it was a period around 475 to 221 BC, when China was divided into 7 states and it was fueled by chaos, war, and violence. Around the same time, Alexander the Great was conquering the Greek Empire and Buddhism started to spread towards China. The famous philosopher Sun Tzu lived around this period. You know, the dude that most likely wrote the famous book The Art of War. Not only Buddhism, but other 3 philosophies started to rise: legalism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Also, who can forget Confucius? He is the one that invented Confucian.
Confucio fue uno de los que inventó la confusión y por eso de lo más antiguo, fue uno de los chinos japoneses que fue de lo más antiguo. Gracias.
Wise words, Juse. Wise words. Coming back to the origins of the crossbow, the records of the 3 kingdoms found in Tomb 47 and Quinjazui. No, tranquilito, sin ladrar. Sin ladrar que estoy haciendo una grabación, quédate tranquilo, usted estaba dormido. Coming back to the origins of the crossbow, the records of the 3 kingdoms found in Tomb 47 and Qinjazui in 1986 mention the uses of repeating crossbows, like the Chokonu or Leon's crossbow. One of the biggest advantages of crossbows versus bows or longbows is that a crossbow is a weapon that anyone can use, especially the repeating ones. You don't need previous nor intensive training. Going back to the Chokonu, this crossbow excels at fire rate of speed, so much so that it was one of the weapons with the fastest fire of speed up until 1861, when Richard Jordan Gatling invented the Gatling gun. And if you have difficulties to see how a crossbow can be that fast, here is a clip from Rob from the Flying Hunt channel.
Pull back. Same as before.
Now, even Rob's Chokonu looks a lot like the one that Leon uses because, as I said before, they are repeating crossbows. Their intention is not accuracy but to shoot a quick barrage of bolts, though modern crossbows really don't suffer from that issue of accuracy anymore. Interestingly enough, the precursor of both the crossbow and the catapult is a Greek weapon called gastrophitis. This weapon functions very differently from a regular crossbow, since you need to use your belly and your entire body in order to cock the weapon, to eventually shoot it. The funny thing about this weapon is that it was only mentioned by a Greek poet called Heron of Alexandria in his work Pelopoeica. There aren't accurate records of the gastrophitis actually being used in battle, but it's definitely the forerunner of both the crossbow and catapult, which, at some point of history, evolved into the much easier to use crossbow. Coming back to the present, I made a very quick and lazy investigation about the modern crossbows, and after looking around, I found out there are different models of crossbows, and even though I couldn't find an exact match to Leon's, I'm pretty sure that he's using a pistol crossbow. The pistol crossbows are smaller and easier to use than a regular one, and according to this page on Amazon, that particular model can fire many bolts in a very short time, which mirrors the one that we use on the game. Also, look how this image totally wrecks one of my statements. They travel at 160 feet per second or around 45 meters. Great journalism work. Now that we know what is a crossbow, we need to do a clarification of certain things in order to answer today's question. We need to know the difference between a remake, remaster, and reimagine. What is a remake? When we think of remakes, we think of Demon's Souls, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, or Black Mesa, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of you will immediately think of Resident Evil. Resident Evil set a huge precedent. Originally released on March 22, 1996, the gaming community stopped when Shinji Mikami announced on 2001 that they were gonna do a remake of the original Resident Evil game for the GameCube console. He felt that the original game aged poorly and needed a better presentation for what he envisioned. 6 years later, after the original came out, Capcom released Resident Evil on March 22nd, 2002. Yes, Resident Evil Remake, the game that set the bar on how a remake should be done. The game that up until this day, people still talk and praise and say many things about, was done and developed in 1 year and 2 months. In fact, many of the new things from the remake, like the Crimson Head or the scenario with Lisa Trevor, were added very close to launch, since Mikami thought that it was going to be boring and predictable to the people who already played the first one. All of this is to say that Resident Evil Remake, which was lovely nicknamed as Remake, was huge. Personally, I don't think that I am going to be able to do justice of how good and great that game is, considering that this is a video about a crossbow. If you want to see a full video about Remake, I highly suggest you to watch the Sphere Hunter video about it. Susie made an amazing job about that. Anyhow, the important thing is that remakes are way older than you may think. In fact, they go way back up until the 80s, though at that time, remakes were ports from arcade to home systems. Atari was a company founded in 1972 by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. Nolan, who was born in 1943, Clearfield, Utah, was always passionate about games, specifically board games. He said, "I can remember playing Monopoly and Clue with my neighborhood friends, chess incessantly. I played tournament chess. I played number 2 board at Utah State University. I've always been a game player, period." Originally, the company was going to be called CCG Co., though they were forced to change it because the name was already taken. Nolan chose the word Atari from the Chinese board game Go. The word Atari loosely translates to "you are about to be engulfed." I thought Atari was a good warning to the competition in the gaming industry. In 1973, they released a game that set ablaze to everything that was known then, Pong. The idea of the game was not to miss the ball. Any person could play it, no matter how skilled or unskilled they were. Pong's success was largely thanks to an engineer called Alan Alcorn. Pong wasn't the only hit from Atari. Since the 70s, Atari was pushing the idea of having a better type of console in our homes, which they eventually did when they released the Atari 2600. You see, the Atari 2600 wasn't the very first console that ever was released to the public. In fact, that's far from it, because 5 years later, in 1972, the first console hit the market. It was called the Magnavox Odyssey. Designed by German inventor and electronic engineer Ralph Habia, he envisioned this idea to give another use to the TV screens. He had envisioned this idea as early as the 60s, and finally, after many failures and prototypes, in 1971, American electronics company Magnavox agreed to manufacture and sell the console. The system came with 2 controls, 12 games, and all of them were in black and white. At this point of time, it was impossible to use cartridges. In order to change the games, you had to insert a printed circuit board and then attach a plastic overlay to the television to simulate the correct playfield. At this time, it was way too expensive to provide any type of electronic background, so the plastic overlay was a cheaper solution. Also, at these times, the games couldn't display, not even make the counts of your score. You had to do it manually, and included in the Odyssey, there was a small cardboard piece so you could do that math. In November 1976, Fairchild Camera and Instrument, an American company that provided research and development for flash photography equipment, released Channel F, the very first console that actually used cartridges. The console included tennis and hockey games, as it was usual at the time. Also, this console could actually render electronic backgrounds, so you didn't have to use that obtuse plastic overlay. But Channel F was nowhere near close to the monster that was going to be released. On September 11, 1977, the Atari 2600 was launched. With color graphics, 2-channel sound, easy-to-use controllers, score tracking, electronic backgrounds, and smooth animations, it was a beast. But this beast was destined to grow to a monster later. In 1980, Atari decided to make a bold move that changed everything. They ported Space Invaders from arcade to their console. It was a huge success. It sold around 1 million units, and by the end of 1982, around 5.6 million of units. That's insane, considering that this was a brand new technology. In 1982, Activision released an adventure type of game, Pitfall, and 2 years later, its sequel, Pitfall 2: The Lost Caverns. If you never played any of these two games or you know nothing about it, on this game you basically play as Harry Pitfall, and your task is to collect all the treasures in the jungle in less than 20 minutes. You can jump, climb, run, and more importantly, swing from vines. In the sequel you can do all of that as well, but also the scope of the scrolling universe is improved as you can go underground. Also, the sequel decided to eliminate both the lights and time systems, so you don't feel rushed. Now, as I mentioned before, those two games were made by Activision, and they were really successful because they decided to make an interesting choice. In 1985, they requested Sega to do a port from home console to arcade. Sega made that port very quickly. They had so much free time that they added new levels, layouts, and an entire overhaul of the graphics, including more details. Sega could have made a simple port and call it a day, but they chose not to. They chose to do an enhancing experience over the original product. Is it me, or is this very similar to what Mikami was envisioned for Remake? So, remakes are not something new, they are not something trendy that came out of nowhere, and the only reason behind remakes is just money. And yeah, sure, of course there is a lot of money involved on remakes, but that's not the solely reason or just to milk out of your nostalgia. Remakes have been here, as I said, since the 80s. Having said all of this, what is a remake? In my opinion, a video game remake is when a game is built from scratch, probably using a different engine from the original. The music, the sound effects, graphics, and animations are overhauled while the gameplay mechanics are reviewed, enhanced, or changed. New animations, areas, effects, gameplay mechanics, characters, and much more are added in a remake. The devs will use this opportunity to flesh out things that age poorly or to introduce concepts or ideas that were impossible to do on the original product. A remake tries to emulate what you felt when you played the original product for the first time, while delivering it in a much needed modern way. Also, the storytelling receives the same treatment. New elements can be added, while old elements that age poorly or don't fit these new ideas are axed. A general agreement is, as long as the storytelling is not that different and the new elements are not disrupted, everyone will be happy. How about remasters? Whereas remakes are built from the ground up, remasters tend to use the source code from the original product to improve the graphics, music, and everything inside of that source code. So a remaster is the exact same thing as a remake, but you don't have to build everything from the ground up. Remasters are more similar to the ports that I talked before. They try to preserve as much as they can from the original source, and interestingly enough, they tend not to touch the narrative of the story. Remasters are done not only to give an updated presentation to an old game, but sometimes to save those games from being abandonwares. A good example of this is Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Originally released on September 13, 2007 for the PSP, the game was pretty much locked and abandoned to the handheld. If you wanted to play it, either you need to have a PSP and buy an UMD to play it, or just emulate it. Parasite Eve actually suffers from this. Even though the first game is highly praised and it's considered a really unique experience, both with the storytelling and the gameplay, the only way to legally play it right now is by buying a used game. I think that the game is still on the store of the PlayStation 3, but I hardly doubt that anyone will just buy a PS3 just to play Parasite Eve. To be honest, it's very easy to play both Parasite Eve and Parasite Eve 2. But the real issue is the third birthday, because this game suffers the same issue that Crisis Core had. As much as I dislike the third birthday, and in my opinion, that game ruined the chances of a Parasite Eve revival, right now you can only play it through emulation. And don't get me wrong, I love and support emulation. Emulation is a very important thing to preserve games. But a cooler neat thing about remasters, besides you being able to easily play them, is that the gameplay mechanics are positively revamped. I mean, look at Crisis Core Reunion. The gameplay loop from Zack is quick and snappy, and it's not bizarre or annoying to play anymore. Using Crisis Core as an example, even though you can easily just download a PSP emulator, there's literally no reason to go back to the original, as the remaster is vastly superior from the original game. Reimagines. So finally we have reached to the reimagines. Reimagines are exactly like remakes, but they have a huge and key difference. They tend to go wild either with the graphics, art direction, gameplay mechanics, music, or more important, the storytelling. The best example of a wild reimagine is Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Silent Hill Shattered Memories was released for the Wii console in 2009. It was developed by Climax Studios, the same developers that made Silent Hill Origins. This game started as a faithful remake of the original Silent Hill game, but for some reason, the devs started to deviate so much from the original game that they decided to go wild and create something new, using the story of Harry and Alessa as a foundation. The game has no combat mechanics, terrible running sections, annoying new side characters, a silly psychotherapy section with Kaufman while Alessa is the one in the sessions, and Harry and Dahlia are somehow dating? Yeah, I spoiled you the game, but really, don't play it, it fucking sucks. Before continuing, let's take a quick break and let's give our thanks to today's not sponsor, Subscribe. Subscribe is free to use, and all you have to do is just go down there and press the subscribe button. That's it. In return, you will get dumb content. Will it be good? No. Will it be fun? Hardly. Will the videos be edited? Barely. With Subscribe, you get a lot of advantages, like being part of a community that likes silly stuff, watching my dumb edits, or liking this duck that totally looks like Leon and I didn't poorly draw it. Next month, we will do a Duck Leon competition, and all you have to do to be in is just to subscribe and then draw a Duck Leon. Send me the images to Twitter or Instagram. So, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and subscribe. I support you. So, let's go back to not answering the question of the title, and let's do a very quick recap. A crossbow is a bow that you press some type of trigger and a bolt will go out fast. Remakes are usually built from the ground up, possibly using newer software, newer techniques, engine, etc. They aim to give a representation of what the devs originally wanted. Remasters use the original source code and they upscale it to improve certain areas of the game, and sometimes to prevent total abandonware. Reimagines are the same as remakes, but they go wild and bananas with the elements inside the original game. As a bonus, I'm going to add Reboot. It's really self-explanatory, but basically they take elements of an established IP and they start over the story arc. Remakes can be reboots, but usually reboots are ways to reinterpret a game or a franchise. I mean, Capcom did this with Resident Evil 7, which was a soft reboot of the entire series. Additionally, it really doesn't matter if a game receives a remake, remaster, reboot, or just a reimagined treatment. All of them share something in common: time and trends. The year when a game receives any of those treatments will really dictate how it will go. A good example of this is Tomb Raider 2013. In there, we play as a young Lara Croft on her very first adventure. And for some reason, Crystal Dynamics, the developers, they decided to add a very odd and out of nowhere mechanic: health regeneration. If you never played any of the Tomb Raider games, first of all, what are you doing? Go ahead and play them. But secondly, in the original 9 games before the reboot, you heal by using medpacks that you find while exploring. But on Tomb Raider 2013, Lara regenerates her life. Why? Well, because it was trendy amongst video games that you have to heal tied to a passive regeneration. No explanation given or a lot of reason to why. I guess they had some type of backlash back then because they decided to change that for Rise and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. In those games, the health regeneration thing is still in there, but there's a new option to heal by basically using berries. A good thing about those two games is that they have a lot of accessibility options, including a way to remove health regeneration, so you only heal by eating those berries. If you ever decide to play the Reboot trilogy, please play them hard because the games are way too easy. Trust me, you are going to have much more fun with the harder difficulties. Going back to Resident Evil, whereas Remake focused on being really close and faithful to the original, while adding some much needed gameplay enhancements and surprises while being gritty and gothic, Resident Evil 4 Remake is a little bit more loose, giving us motion capture, cinematic moments, stellar voice acting, surprises, and, as I said, Ashley and Luis are hugely improved. Unlike Remake that tries to be very faithful to the original, Resident Evil 4 Remake has a lot of both remakes and reimagines. Many of the places are there, but the way that it's presented is very different. Ashley is taken by one of the hands instead of being yeeted away from a novistador. Mendes stalks you for 2 seconds and it's just not a menace on cutscenes. Luis is 1000 times hotter than the original. One of the biggest things of Resident Evil 4 Remake is that this game feels like a love letter to both the players and to the franchise itself. There is something that I've seen and no one is talking about this. Resident Evil 4 Remake took a lot of inspiration from Remake, from one-liners to very subtle things that remind me of certain places of the original Remake, and El Ganado Desnucado being almost a carbon copy of the Crimson Heads. This game played an homage to their own roots while making it snappy and modern. A huge upgrade is the cult aspect. At any chance, the enemies will act in a cultish way. I mean, look at the beginning of the village. They're literally praising the burning of a man. Also, take into consideration the implication of the zealots. They're purposefully bursting their heads so the plaga can possess their body. Being the red zealot, a type of priest who not only does it himself, but he causes in a massive AoE bursting while chanting Gloria a las plagas, Gloria a las plagas.
Close your eyes.
And the horror aspect is also amped up. The way that the infection is spread mirrors what happened in Raccoon City. Instead of being bitten by a zombie, this time Luis' grandpa was bitten by an infected wolf, and that spreaded this terrible rumor of a madness that eventually Los Iluminados claimed that they were able to cure it. This makes Luis a more tragic character. Not only he lost his grandpa, but the community that he lived in, and then he decided to make a terrible choice by working on Umbrella Europe, meaning he was directly responsible for Nemesis, which, by the way, it was a nice retcon to explain why Nemesis has these new abilities. The good thing about remakes are surprises. Since we know the original product, we have an idea of what's going to happen, and the devs can use that against us. Both El Ganado Desnucado and the Red Zealots are good examples, or how Las Armaduras try to evade every shoot that they receive, or how there are surprises like
Forastero!
Where? Oh shit! I was just looking something.
But to me, the biggest surprise wasn't Leon super badass and super amazing, or Luis being hugely expanded, or how terrifying and deadlier are all the ganados. To me, the biggest change that Resident Evil 4 Remake has, and it's something that it's going to be praised upon the years, is Ashley. The entire point of the game is rescuing her, and in the original game, she's really annoying. Not necessarily because it's an annoying escort mission, but more because she is the classical damsel in distress. You see, in my original playthrough of Resident Evil 4, I mentioned this.
I really don't like Ashley, mostly because she's devoid of any type of personality or character, and she's the perfect example of just an escort mission done badly. 1 year before this game came out, Silent Hill 4 came out, and Silent Hill is not an action game, and Silent Hill had a better escort mission than this one, because Eileen, even though she was badly injured, she kicks ass, she really helped you through the entire game, she does nice commentary and conversations, and she does all of that while wearing heels.
I 100% stand about everything that I said back then. Eileen is really a better escort mission than Ashley, even though Silly Hill it's not an action game. A problem with Ashley is that she acts like she gets kidnapped by a Spaniard cool every weekend, and she has this bizarre sexual thing going on. On the remake, this was hugely revised, and she acts accordingly. At the beginning, she's really fearful, and it makes sense. Even in the original, she's just a teen who was kidnapped. But that slowly changes on the remake. The very first time that she has to do a piggyback, it's very clear that she's really scared, but because she talks way more with Leon and opens up to him, including during gameplay moments, she grows little by little. Actions like helping us after fighting Mendes, or she trying her hardest to contain Sadler's control over her and not shooting Leon, makes her stronger and confident. So much that by the time you do the last piggyback, she's a different person, assertive and with confidence. She's not anymore a damsel in distress. She is your partner. And the best part is that Leon never got annoyed or upset, not even once. Even when she ran away at the very beginning, he was really understanding of her situation. So much so that he was able to trust a complete stranger that's clearly infected, to buy weapons from him like a certain bolt thrower. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dude, when you're finally going to answer the question of the title, why the bolt thrower is important? Why you keep talking about these nonsensical things? And all I can say to you is...
Foolish little lamb.
Oh no.
Child.
Going back to the original Resident Evil 2 game, in the BS scenario with Claire, you can find the bow gun on the stairs office on the weapons cabinet. This very same cabinet that some couple of hours ago, Miss Valentine finds either the Magnum or a grenade launcher. Also, on separate ways, you can find a bow gun with Ada, and in her planned appearance on Resident Evil Village, that was ultimately Axe, shows her wielding a crossbow. But what the hell do they have to do with anything, Max? Well, the bolt thrower is terrible. It's slow to reload, the damage is very low, and adding the mines is a nightmare. I don't know any of you, but I struggled during the entire game just to put the stupid mines. I mean, look at this clip.
What the hell is happening?
Come on, attach to the fucking mine, bitch! Attach to the mine! Putting the mines on this fucking gun is a nightmare.
Having said that, you can reuse the bolts, and in the section with the two garradores, it can actually help you to avoid them for quite some time since the bolts are silent. So, why the bolt thrower is important? Well, after explaining a lot of stuff like how a crossbow functions, the story of Atari, what is a remake, and etc., in my opinion, the bolt thrower is important because it is a metaphorical connection with two of the most important people in Leon's life, Ada and Claire. The Raycon City incident really affected Leon, turning him from a regular citizen into a broken person, but at the same time into one of the most badass agents. And thanks to Claire and Ada, he was able to survive the worst night of his life. This bolt thrower is an evolution that tries to tie in a forgotten past with a future that wasn't realized, and bridge those things with the here and now, rescuing Ashley. How can I be so sure about that? Well, you are in luck, pal, because I am not. The reality is that I pulled all of that out of my ass. Honestly, the bolt thrower is just a better version of the mine thrower from the original game. And just like Claire, Leo's crossbow fucking sucks. And if you're asking yourself, Pat, what was the point of that entire diatribe of remake, remaster, reboot, reimagine? Well, that's very easy to answer. I just needed an excuse to say how much I loved Resident Evil 4 Remake. I didn't want to use a generic title. Sorry.